The morning of June 6, 1944, 7:10 hours, the English Channel off the coast of Normandy. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder crouched in the lead landing craft as machine gun fire tore through the air above his head. 40 minutes late. 40 minutes that had given the German defenders time to recover from the naval bombardment, time to position themselves at the cliff edge, time to prepare for what was coming. Rudder scanned the 100-foot vertical wall of rock and mud rising before him. Somewhere up there, 6 French-made 155mm guns commanded both Utah and Omaha beaches. Guns with a 25,000-yard range, guns that could rain destruction on thousands of Allied soldiers now wading ashore just miles away. His orders were simple: scale those cliffs under fire, seize the battery, destroy the guns. General Omar Bradley himself had called it the most dangerous mission of D-Day. What Rudder couldn't know, what no one in Allied command knew, was that those guns weren't where intelligence said they'd be. The massive concrete casemates his Rangers had trained for months to assault sat empty. Wooden telephone poles wrapped in camouflage netting had fooled aerial reconnaissance. The real guns had been moved inland weeks ago, hidden in an apple orchard, still operational, still pointing toward Utah Beach. By 9:30 that morning, 2 men would find those guns. 2 Rangers who refused to quit when the primary mission appeared to fail. And in the space of 10 minutes, armed with nothing but thermite grenades and pure luck, they would accomplish what massive naval bombardments and hundreds of bombers could not. They would save thousands of American lives. But first, they had to survive the climb. The distinctive crack of German rifles shattered the pre-dawn darkness as Rudder's landing craft ground against the narrow pebble beach at the base of Pointe du Hoc. The naval bombardment had stopped at 06:25, timed for the Rangers' scheduled landing at 06:30. But navigation errors caused by strong currents and poor visibility had sent the assault force 3 miles off course. By the time the coxswains recognized their mistake and corrected toward the actual objective, precious minutes had evaporated. Those minutes meant everything. The German defenders, stunned and scattered by the massive pre-assault bombardment from battleship USS Texas and her escorts, had time to recover, time to return to their positions, time to prepare their machine guns and grenades for the moment when American soldiers would be most vulnerable, suspended on ropes halfway up a sheer cliff face, with nowhere to run. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Sergeant Leonard Lomel pressed himself against the forward bulkhead of his landing craft as German fire intensified. At 24 years old, he was acting commander of the 2nd Platoon, Dog Company. His men, 65 of them when they'd left England, were about to attempt something military experts had declared impossible. One intelligence officer had looked at reconnaissance photos and stated flatly that 3 old women with brooms could keep the Rangers from climbing that cliff. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force had estimated casualties would reach 70%. The lead landing craft struck the beach at 07:10. The ramp dropped into waist-deep water churned by the morning tide. Machine gun fire immediately found the exposed opening. Men in the front rows fell before they could move. Others leaped over the gunwales, some disappearing into underwater bomb craters created by the bombardment. The beach itself was barely 50 feet wide, a narrow strip of fist-sized stones that offered no cover. Staff Sergeant Jack Coon hit the water and struggled toward the cliff base, watching rockets fire from tubes mounted on the landing craft. The rockets carried grappling hooks trailing manila ropes, designed to arc up and catch on the cliff top. But the ropes had been soaking in seawater for hours. Waterlogged hemp weighed twice its normal load. Most rockets fell short, their ropes splashing uselessly back into the surf. The Germans had recovered completely from their surprise. Potato masher grenades arced over the cliff edge. Machine gun fire swept across the stone in measured bursts. The Americans were pinned, trapped between the water behind them and a vertical wall of mud and rock in front, with death raining down from above. But some ropes made it. Some grappling hooks caught on shattered concrete or wedged into crevices created by the bombardment. And when they did, Rangers started climbing. not waiting for the beach to be secured, not waiting for covering fire, just climbing, because every second delayed meant more men dying on that exposed strip of stone. USS Satterlee, a destroyer, moved to within hundreds of yards of the beach. Her 5-inch guns traversed upward, firing at the German positions with precision that bordered on reckless. Shells passed just yards above the climbing men. The destroyer's fire forced Germans back from the edge, buying precious seconds for the assault. Sergeant Lommel reached for the next handhold, his Thompson submachine gun bouncing against his back with each movement. The bombardment had paradoxically created climbing aids. Tons of clay and rock had cascaded down the cliff, creating ramps that reduced the effective height rangers needed to climb by rope. What should have been a 100-foot vertical ascent became, in places, a 50 or 60-foot climb, followed by scrambling across shattered terrain. By 0740, the first rangers reached the cliff top. Lieutenant Sidney Salomon of Fox Company pulled himself over the edge and immediately came under fire from a German machine gun position, 50 yards inland. He rolled left, bringing his carbine up, and returned fire. More rangers appeared over the edge, spreading out by instinct and training, moving from crater to crater across a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon. The pre-assault bombardment had been devastatingly thorough. Months of aerial attacks culminating in strikes by 108 Royal Air Force heavy bombers just hours before the landing. They'd dropped 635 tons of high explosive on an area barely the size of 4 football fields, every building reduced to rubble, every prepared position shattered, the earth itself torn and reshaped by explosive force. First Sergeant Lommel cleared the cliff edge and immediately assessed the tactical situation. His platoon was scattered across maybe 200 yards of cratered ground. Radio communication was failing, the equipment soaked by salt spray. He scanned the landscape for the gun emplacements that should have been their primary objectives. Intelligence photos had shown 6 concrete casemates, massive bunkers with walls 6 to 10 feet thick, designed to protect French-made GPF 155mm howitzers. He moved toward the nearest position, carbine at the ready, expecting resistance at any moment. The entrance gaped open, shattered by direct hits from naval gunfire. He entered cautiously. The interior was empty, not empty of Germans, empty of guns. The massive artillery piece that should have occupied this position was simply gone. Private First Class Jack Convoy reached the second casemate, discovered the same thing. No gun. In the third position, they found something that made the situation clear. A wooden telephone pole, roughly the right dimensions of a 155mm gun tube wrapped in camouflage netting. A decoy, designed to fool Allied aerial reconnaissance. And it had worked perfectly. "Jesus Christ, there's no guns here," Lommel muttered to staff. "Sergeant Kuhn. They've got to be somewhere." The tactical situation was becoming clearer. The Rangers had successfully scaled the cliffs. They'd established a foothold on the point, but the primary mission was failing. The guns that threatened Omaha and Utah beaches weren't here. And somewhere out there, maybe already firing, those guns could be inflicting exactly the casualties this mission was designed to prevent. Rudder established his command post in a shattered observation bunker near the cliff edge. His situation was dire. Of the 225 Rangers who'd begun the assault, casualties already exceeded 15%. 2 landing craft had been lost. 1 DUKW had been disabled by fire before reaching the beach. More critically, reinforcements weren't coming. The plan had called for a second wave to follow if the initial assault succeeded, but the delayed landing meant the deadline had passed. Force C, comprising the entire 5th Ranger Battalion plus companies Able, and Baker of the 2nd Rangers, over 500 men, had diverted to Omaha Beach. Those 500 Rangers would help turn the tide at Omaha, but their absence meant Rudder's force was alone, isolated, cut off from reinforcement with a mission that appeared to have failed. Except Leonard Lommel wasn't ready to quit. He'd noticed something during the advance inland, a dirt road, sunken between hedgerows in the Norman style, leading south from the coastal highway. The road showed fresh track marks, deep impressions, too heavy to be farm equipment. The kind of marks that heavy artillery pieces might make. He found Kuhn and explained what he'd seen. Let's check it out. They had orders to establish a roadblock on the coastal highway to prevent German reinforcements from moving east toward Omaha Beach. Most of the platoon was already moving to those positions, but Lamel believed in initiative, in pushing beyond orders when the situation demanded it. The guns were out there, somewhere. Finding them remained the mission. The two Rangers moved south along the hedgerow-lined lane, leapfrogging in proper tactical bounds. Kuhn would advance while Lamel provided cover, then they'd switch. The road curved gently, following the natural contours of the Norman countryside. They could hear firing behind them as their fellow Rangers secured the coastal highway positions. 250 yards. That's how far they'd gone when Lamel suddenly stopped, his hand shooting out to halt Kuhn. He'd seen something through a gap in the hedgerow. He turned to Kuhn and half-whispered, "Jack, here they are. We've found them. Here are the goddamned guns." There, hidden beneath camouflage netting in an apple orchard, pointed directly at Utah Beach, sat 5 French GPF 155mm howitzers, arranged in a perfect battery formation, ready to fire. Ammunition stacked nearby, charges prepared. But no Germans. The crews had apparently pulled back during the bombardment, fearing a stray naval shell might detonate their ammunition stockpile. They were forming up across an open field, roughly 100 meters away, clearly preparing to man their guns, but in no particular hurry. Lamel never hesitated. "Give me your grenades, Jack. Cover me. I'm going to fix them." He had 2 thermite grenades on his equipment belt. Kuhn handed over his 2. 4 grenades total. 5 guns. Lamel ran in a crouch toward the nearest howitzer. Thermite grenades were designed for destroying equipment. White phosphorus, mixed with powdered aluminum that burned at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to fuse a gun's recoil mechanism into a useless mass of slag. He reached the first gun and worked quickly. The recoil mechanism was accessible through an inspection hatch. Lamel pulled the pin on his first grenade, dropped it into the mechanism, and moved immediately to the second gun. Pin out, grenade in, move. Third gun, fourth gun. 4 grenades, 4 guns disabled. The 5th gun remained operational, but Lamel wasn't done. He wrapped his field jacket around the buttstock of his Thompson submachine gun and began systematically smashing the sights on all 5 weapons. Without accurate sights, even a functioning gun couldn't hit a target at range. He worked with methodical precision, years of training taking over. Across the field, the German gun crews were starting to react. Someone had spotted movement. Shouts in German carried across the orchard. Lamel finished his work and sprinted back to the hedgerow where Kuhn waited, carbine trained on the advancing Germans. "Jack, we got to get some more thermite grenades." They ran back toward the coastal highway. Rangers there handed over their thermite grenades without question. But as they approached the orchard for a second time, they saw Rangers from Easy Company already there. The second patrol had discovered the same guns. They'd finished the job, destroying the ammunition cache and setting fire to the powder charges. Black smoke rose from the orchard as hundreds of pounds of explosives burned. By 0900 hours, roughly 90 minutes after the first Rangers had touched the beach, the mission was complete. The guns that had threatened Utah and Omaha beaches were destroyed. Every one of them. The Rangers at Pointe du Hoc became the first American unit to accomplish its D-Day objective. But accomplishing the mission and surviving to report it were 2 different things. As Lamel and Kuhn returned to their positions on the coastal highway, German counterattacks were already beginning. Elements of the 914th Grenadier Regiment, part of the 352nd Infantry Division, were moving to retake the point. Fresh troops, professional soldiers who'd spent the morning waiting for orders, now committed to eliminating the American penetration before it could be reinforced. The Rangers dug in along both sides of the coastal road, using whatever cover they could find in the cratered landscape. They had maybe 190 men still capable of fighting, Casualties during the climb and subsequent clearing operations had reduced Rudder's force by roughly 15%. They were low on ammunition, their radios were failing, and reinforcements were 7 miles away fighting for their lives on Omaha Beach. The first German counterattack hit at 1100 hours, a probe by roughly 40 soldiers from the 1st Company of the 914th Grenadier Regiment. They advanced in good order, using fire and movement tactics that demonstrated professional training. Rangers responded with concentrated fire from their defensive positions. Browning automatic rifles delivered sustained automatic fire that the Germans couldn't match with their bolt-action rifles. The Moni Garand's 8-round en-bloc clip gave American infantrymen a significant advantage. The initial probe was beaten back within 30 minutes. German casualties were hard to estimate, but Ranger observers counted at least a dozen bodies left in the field when the attackers withdrew. American casualties were lighter, 3 wounded, none killed in this first exchange. But ammunition expenditure was heavy. Rangers were already rationing their remaining rounds. Lieutenant Colonel Rudder sent a message via one of the few functioning radios. The transmission was brief, the signal weak, but the content clear. Mission accomplished, guns destroyed. Heavy casualties, need reinforcements and ammunition. The response came back hours later. Reinforcements were unavailable. The 5th Rangers and elements of the 116th Infantry Regiment were still pinned down on Omaha Beach. The Rangers at Pointe du Hoc would have to hold alone. As the sun began to set on June 6th, the Rangers prepared for their first night of siege. They'd accomplished their primary mission. The guns were destroyed. But now came the harder part, surviving long enough to report that success, holding against counterattacks that would test every aspect of their training and every measure of their courage. The first night attack came at 2300 hours. The Germans advanced under cover of darkness, their approach masked by the natural sounds of wind through the devastated landscape. They were trying to infiltrate the American perimeter to get close enough for grenade attacks against the Ranger positions. The firefight lasted 20 minutes, individual exchanges between small groups rather than coordinated assault. Grenades arced through the darkness, their explosions briefly illuminating the cratered ground. The Rangers held their positions but expended precious ammunition in the process. Lommel estimated his platoon had fired over 300 rounds. Simple mathematics suggested they couldn't sustain that rate of fire for long. At 0100 hours, 1 a.m. on June 7th, the Germans tried again. This attack was better coordinated, with automatic weapons fire from multiple positions, providing covering fire for advancing infantry. The Rangers could hear German squad leaders shouting orders, could track the attack's development by the sound of machine gun fire shifting positions. The second attack penetrated deeper into the American perimeter. German soldiers reached the edge of Rudder's command post area, close enough that Rangers were fighting with pistols and hand-to-hand combat techniques. Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn found himself grappling with a German soldier in a shell crater, both men's rifles discarded, fighting for control of a combat knife. Kuhn prevailed, but the desperate nature of the combat told him everything about how close the Germans were getting. The attack was finally repulsed at 0230, but at significant cost. Rangers had expended most of their remaining grenades. Ammunition for the Browning automatic rifles was critically low. Several positions reported they were down to fewer than 20 rounds per man, and casualties continued to mount. The third German attack came at 0300 hours. This one was the strongest yet, maybe 100 soldiers attacking along multiple axes, trying to overwhelm the stretched American defenses through sheer numbers. But the Rangers had one advantage the Germans couldn't overcome. They held the point itself, that crucial observation position. And from that position, with the first light of dawn beginning to colour the eastern sky, forward observers could finally direct effective naval gunfire. USS Satterlee responded within minutes, her 5-inch guns traversing to calculated coordinates. The first salvo landed short. Correction, up 200, right 50. Fire for effect. The second salvo landed among the advancing German infantry. High explosive shells detonating across their formation, creating casualties and confusion. The attack faltered as German soldiers sought cover. Squad leaders tried to maintain momentum, but coordinated advance collapsed into individual survival instincts. By 0400 hours, dawn on June 7th, the German counterattack had been broken. Ranger observers counted over 20 enemy bodies visible in the growing light, but the cost was becoming clear. Only 90 Rangers remained capable of fighting. Out of 225 men who'd landed the previous morning, 60% were now casualties. Sergeant Lamel took stock of his platoon as morning light revealed the battlefield. Of the 65 men he'd commanded 24 hours earlier, he could account for maybe 40. Of those, only about 25 were fully effective. They'd fired so much ammunition during the night attacks that some positions were down to single-digit round counts. Several Rangers had switched to captured German weapons, using enemy ammunition stocks to supplement their depleted supply. The morning of June 7th brought no relief, only confirmation that the Rangers were truly isolated. Rudder sent another radio message to division headquarters. Ammunition, critical. Water, gone. Many wounded. Need immediate reinforcement. The response offered little comfort. The 5th Rangers were attempting to fight their way west toward Pointe du Hoc, but they were 7 miles away, facing determined resistance. Relief was coming, but it wouldn't arrive today. Around 0800 hours, Rangers observed German forces massing for another attack. This time, the preparation was more methodical. Mortar fire began falling on American positions, 60mm and 81mm rounds whistling down from high ground the Germans controlled. The Rangers had no counter-battery capability. They could only endure the bombardment and wait for the inevitable infantry assault. The German assault began at 0930. Infantry advanced in company strength, maybe 120 soldiers, supported by concentrated machine gun fire from multiple positions. This attack was better organized than the night assaults, with clear fire support coordination and good tactical movement. The Germans had learned from their previous failures and were adapting their tactics. Rangers responded with everything they had left. Browning automatic rifles fired controlled bursts, conserving ammunition. Monet-Garens cracked steadily, and increasingly, captured German weapons added their voices to the defense, creating a confused acoustic battlefield where both sides were using similar weapons. At 1000 hours, German infantry actually penetrated the Ranger line near the roadblock position. A squad of 10 soldiers broke through between defensive positions, exploiting a gap created when casualties had reduced manning below sustainable levels. They reached the coastal highway itself, momentarily threatening to cut the American force in two. Staff Sergeant Kuhn organized the immediate counterattack. He grabbed every Ranger within shouting distance, maybe 8 men total, and led them toward the penetration. They advanced by bounds, using the cratered terrain for cover, firing as they moved. Close-quarters combat in shell craters and shattered bunkers, soldiers fighting with rifles, pistols, knives, and bare hands when ammunition ran out. When it was over, all 10 Germans were dead or captured, but Kuhn himself had taken shrapnel wounds to his left arm and shoulder. He refused evacuation, wrapped field dressings around the wounds, and returned to his position. The German assault finally broke at 11:30 hours. Lomel's platoon had expended everything. They'd fired every American round, every captured German round, every grenade. Several positions reported they were completely out of ammunition. If the Germans attacked again in the next hour, there would be nothing to stop them. But the Germans didn't know that. From their perspective, they'd just been repulsed with heavy casualties for the 4th time. The American position appeared stronger than it actually was. Around 1300 hours, 1 p.m., an American landing craft appeared offshore. The LCT carried ammunition, water, medical supplies, and a platoon of reinforcements, 40 Rangers from the 5th Battalion, who'd finally broken through from Omaha Beach. Getting the supplies from the boat to the cliff top was dangerous work that exposed men to both enemy fire and the risk of falling. But desperate situations demanded desperate measures. Every box of .30 caliber ammunition represented the difference between holding another day or being overrun. Lieutenant Charles Parker led the reinforcing platoon up the cliff. They reached the top to find a battlefield that looked like photographs of the Western Front from 1918. Shell craters overlapping, shattered concrete and twisted metal, exhausted Rangers who looked like they'd aged 10 years in 36 hours. With the reinforcements, Rudder now commanded about 130 effectives. Better than before, but still grossly outnumbered. The resupply had bought time, but it hadn't changed the fundamental tactical situation. The Rangers remained isolated, surrounded, and dependent on relief forces fighting their way through determined German resistance. As evening approached, Rangers prepared for another night of defensive fighting. They'd learned from the previous night's experience. Positions were improved with better fields of fire. Listening posts were established forward of the main perimeter. Passwords were established and frequently changed. Every lesson paid for in blood the previous night was now applied. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The night of June 7th brought renewed German attacks. At midnight, the Germans launched a coordinated assault against the eastern sector. This attack was the strongest. Yet, maybe 150 soldiers attacking on a narrow front, trying to overwhelm American defenses. Rudder called for naval gunfire support. USS Satterlee and HMS Talibont responded within minutes. The destroyers fired star shells first, illuminating the battlefield with harsh white light that revealed German positions. Then, high-explosive rounds, carefully plotted to land just beyond the Ranger perimeter. The combination of Ranger defensive fire and naval gunfire support broke the attack within 45 minutes. German casualties were heavy, but American casualties were mounting too. The aid station now held over 50 wounded men, most requiring evacuation that remained impossible as long as the Rangers stayed isolated. The second attack came at 0300 hours on June 8th, targeting the western sector. But Rudder had positioned his reinforcements in reserve, mobile forces that could respond to penetrations wherever they occurred. When German infantry broke through, near the roadblock position, Parker's Rangers counterattacked immediately. The fighting was desperate, close-quarters combat in darkness, but the penetration was contained and eventually eliminated. By 0500 hours, dawn on June 8th, the Germans had withdrawn. Their casualties over 2 nights of attacks had become unsustainable. Ranger observers counted over 70 German bodies visible from their positions. The 914th Grenadier Regiment had been systematically destroyed by a force less than a tenth their size. But the Rangers had paid their own price. Only 90 men remained capable of fighting. Out of 225 who'd landed on June 6th, 60% were now casualties. 77 dead, 52 wounded, 38 missing, most later confirmed as prisoners taken during the confused night fighting. Rudder radioed another situation report. Request immediate relief. Casualties at 60%. Ammunition sufficient for one more. Engagement. Cannot hold beyond today without reinforcement. The response came back within an hour. Relief was en route. Elements of the 5th Rangers were within 2 miles of Pointe du Hoc. The 116th Infantry Regiment, supported by tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion, was also pushing toward the Ranger position. Relief would arrive by mid-morning. At 0800 hours, Rangers on the perimeter heard the distinctive sound of American tank engines. The M4 Shermans of the 743rd Tank Battalion were advancing along the coastal highway, their 75mm guns engaging German positions. Behind the tanks, infantry from the 116th Regiment advanced in company formation, overwhelming remaining German resistance. By 0930 hours, lead elements of the relief force reached Ranger positions. The link-up was emotional despite professional military bearing. Rangers who'd fought for 54 hours, with minimal sleep, no food, little water, and dwindling ammunition, suddenly found themselves among friendly forces with supplies and support. Some men collapsed from exhaustion. Others wept openly, the psychological strain finally released when survival became likely rather than improbable. Medics immediately began evacuating wounded Rangers. The men were carried on stretchers to the beach, where landing craft waited to transport them to hospital ships offshore. Rudder himself had been wounded twice during the fighting. He'd refused evacuation, stayed at his command post, continued directing the defense. Now, with relief secured and his mission complete, he finally allowed himself to be treated. Medics bandaged his wounds and strongly recommended evacuation. Rudder refused. His Rangers were still on the point. He would leave when they left. The final accounting took hours. 77 Rangers killed in action, 52 wounded seriously enough to require evacuation. 38 are missing. Out of 225 Rangers who'd landed on June 6th, only 90 remained capable of bearing arms when relief arrived. A casualty rate of 60% that would have destroyed any unit less disciplined, less trained, less committed. But they had accomplished their mission. The 6 155mm guns that threatened Utah and Omaha beaches had been found and destroyed by 0900 hours on D-Day. Leonard Lamell and Jack Coon had personally disabled those weapons, preventing them from firing on the thousands of American soldiers coming ashore. The Rangers had then held the point for 54 hours against repeated German counterattacks, denying the enemy that crucial observation point. The strategic impact was difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. German casualties in the fighting exceeded 150 killed, with likely more wounded. The 914th Grenadier Regiment had been rendered combat ineffective. The guns, if operational, could have ranged both landing beaches and the invasion fleet, potentially causing thousands of casualties and threatening the entire D-Day operation. Against that strategic success, the Rangers had paid their price in blood. Every one of those 77 dead Americans represented a family that would receive a telegram, a mother who would weep, a father who would age overnight. The cost was real and personal and permanent. Sergeant Lamell walked through the battlefield on the afternoon of June 8th, taking stock of what they'd accomplished and what it had cost. The point looked like the surface of the moon, cratered and blasted, every structure destroyed. He found the coastal road where he and Coon had established their roadblock. 72 hours ago, though it felt like years. They'd moved down that sunken lane, following tire tracks to an apple orchard where they'd found 5 guns and changed the course of a battle. Staff Sergeant Coon, his left arm in a sling from shrapnel wounds, joined Lamell at the roadblock position. They didn't speak for several minutes. The friendship forged in combat transcended words. "You think they'll remember this?" Coon finally asked. "What we did here?" Lamell considered the question. "Does it matter? We did what we were ordered to do. Found the guns, destroyed them, held until relief arrived. That's the mission. That's what Rangers do." The days following the relief saw surviving, Rangers gradually moved off the point. They were rotated to rear areas for rest, resupply, and integration of replacements. But the unit would never be the same. The men who'd survived Pointe du Hoc were changed by the experience, marked by combat in ways that training could never replicate. Lieutenant Colonel Rudder received the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest award for valor, for his leadership. Sergeant Leonard Lamell received the Distinguished Service Cross for finding and destroying the guns. He also received the French Legion of Honor and the British Military Medal. Staff Sergeant Jack Coon received the Distinguished Service Cross for his role in the gun destruction and his leadership during the defense. 13 Rangers total received the Distinguished Service Cross. The 2nd Ranger Battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism, but awards and citations couldn't change what the battle had cost. 77 families received telegrams informing them that their sons, husbands, fathers had been killed in action in France. The telegrams were brief, official, and utterly inadequate to convey the loss. The intelligence assessment of the operation took months to complete. Their conclusions validated the Rangers' accomplishment while revealing how close the mission had come to disaster. The German decision to move the guns had been made in late April, after repeated bombing raids threatened to destroy the weapons. The guns were relocated roughly 1 kilometer south of the point, camouflaged but maintained in operational condition. On the morning of June 6th, the gun crews had withdrawn to shelter during the bombardment. They were forming up to return to their weapons when Lommel and Kuhn found and destroyed the battery. German records indicated the crews were approximately 10 minutes from manning their guns. 10 minutes. That's how close the invasion fleet came to being subjected to accurate artillery fire. The battlefield itself was preserved by the French government as a memorial. The Pointe du Hoc Ranger Monument, a simple granite pylon positioned atop a German observation bunker, was erected to honor the accomplishment of Rudder's men. On June 11, 1979, the site was formally transferred to the American Battle Monuments Commission for perpetual care. The landscape remains much as the Rangers left it. Shell craters still mark the earth. Shattered concrete bunkers still stand. Visitors can walk the same ground the Rangers fought across, can look down from the cliff edge at the narrow beach where the assault began. On June 6, 1984, President Ronald Reagan delivered a speech at Pointe du Hoc with 62 Ranger survivors in attendance. He called them the Boys of Pointe du Hoc and spoke of their courage in terms that captured national imagination. These are the boys of Pointe du Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. These are the heroes who helped end a war. The survivors who attended that ceremony were in their 60s, 40 years removed from the 20-something Rangers who'd scaled those cliffs. But the bonds forged in combat remained. They stood together, these old men who'd been young warriors, and remembered friends who never aged beyond June 1944. 77 names etched in memory, 77 lives cut short. The legacy lives on in the 75th Ranger Regiment, the modern descendants of those World War II battalions. Rangers today still train to the same standards, still embrace the same ethos of volunteering for the hardest missions. They study Pointe du Hoc as a demonstration of what Rangers can accomplish when properly trained, properly led, and properly committed to mission success. The guns destroyed by Lommel and Kuhn on the morning of June 6th never fired a shot at Allied forces. The thousands of ships in the invasion fleet remained safe. The soldiers on Utah and Omaha beaches faced horrific German defenses, but not the additional threat of accurate long-range artillery fire. How many lives were saved? Impossible to calculate precisely, but certainly hundreds, possibly thousands. That's the true measure of success at Pointe du Hoc. Not the tactical victory of seizing ground, not the destruction of German positions, but the lives saved by accomplishing a mission that prevented catastrophic casualties. Elsewhere, the Rangers paid a terrible price, but that price purchased something invaluable. It purchased the success of D-Day. It purchased the liberation of France. It purchased the defeat of Nazi Germany and the restoration of freedom to Western Europe. Sergeant Leonard Lommel, before his death in 2011 at age 91, was asked repeatedly about his actions. His answer was always the same. We did what we were trained to do. We did what Rangers do. The real heroes are the 77 who didn't come home. That perspective characterized the Pointe du Hoc survivors. They understood that success required collective effort, that no individual accomplishment mattered as much as unit success, that the mission was bigger than any single person. Those values, instilled through training and validated in combat, defined what it meant to be a Ranger. The story of Pointe du Hoc is ultimately about ordinary men doing extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. They weren't superhuman. They were scared, exhausted, cold, hungry, and facing death with every action. But they'd trained for this. They'd volunteered for this. And when the moment came, when the landing craft ramps dropped and German fire filled the air, they did what needed to be done. They climbed when experts said climbing was impossible. They adapted when the primary mission failed. They fought when outnumbered and surrounded. They held when any rational calculation suggested they should surrender or retreat. And they won, not because victory was certain, but because they refused to accept defeat. The 77 Rangers who died at Pointe du Hoc gave everything. They were sons and brothers and husbands and fathers. They had dreams and plans and futures that ended on a French cliff in June 1944. We honour them not through words alone, but through remembering why they fought and ensuring that their sacrifice achieved lasting purpose. June 6, 1944. 225 Rangers landed on a narrow beach at the base of a 100-foot cliff. Their mission: destroy German guns that threatened the D-Day invasion. By 0900 hours, the mission was complete. By June 8th, only 90 remained capable of bearing arms. The cost was terrible. The accomplishment was decisive. The legacy endures. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.